There are scientific experiments that are so old, they actually outlasted the people who created them. What do these ultra-long-term studies tell us about their subjects? And what do they tell us about the scientists who started them? On this episode of Intrigued Mind, we'll be taking a look at the longest-running experiments in history. Some people's attention spans are so short that they can barely make it through an entire TikTok. These are not the kinds of people who run scientific experiments. In this video, we'll be looking at experiments that lasted decades and produced the sort of insight you can only get with maximum patience. The grant study, which is being run by Harvard Medical School, has been going on for 75 years, and it's still going on right now, although the original faculty who created the study have died. It followed 268 different men, all of whom were Harvard graduates. Most of them were members of the classes of 1942, 43, or 44. Because this isn't exactly a sample size that represents the whole country, it was run simultaneously with the Glueck study. This followed a group of men from a very different sort of background. This study looked at 456 poor, urban youths who grew up in nearby Boston neighborhoods. All of the subjects from both studies were men, and some of them are still alive today. The test subjects were evaluated every 2 years with questionnaires, personal interviews, and doctors. The goal was to get information about their mental and emotional well-being, as well as their physical health. They wanted to know what factors contributed to longevity, good health, good marriages, and just about every other aspect of life you could be interested in. The most famous participant in the study was none other than President John F. Kennedy, who graduated from Harvard in 1940 before joining the Navy. The study has produced a variety of findings, some expected and some unexpected. Alcoholism, it turns out, is extremely destructive over the long term. This wasn't exactly a shocking revelation, but George Vaillant, who directed the study for over 30 years, claims that the data also shows that men who have warm personal relationships make more money, a lot more money. Men who scored highest on measurements of warm relationships earned an average of $141,000 a year more at their salary peaks. About 20 years before the grant study, Lewis Terman started what would become the longest-running study ever in the field of psychology. Originally called the Genetic Studies of Genius, the study is known today as the Terman Study of the Gifted. It followed about 1,500 children with high IQs over the course of several decades. They were regularly observed all the way from childhood up to adulthood. The original goal of the study was to disprove the idea that smart kids were all sickly and socially inept. Essentially, he wanted people to realize that not all intelligent children are a bunch of weak nerds. Why was he so interested in this? Was it because he got shoved into lockers too much when he was a young nerd? Not exactly. He was a proponent of eugenics and wanted to show that intelligence wasn't correlated with physical weakness. Based on the data, he concluded that the gifted children did not suffer more health problems than average, with the exception of generally worse vision. The stereotype of nerds wearing glasses turned out to be real. The study has since been widely criticized for not having a generalizable sample, and for the fact that Terman meddled in the subjects' lives. For instance, he gave some of them letters of recommendation for college. Being a nerd and graduating from Harvard are not the only human activities that have been studied for long periods of time. Starting all the way back in 1940, the UK's National Food Survey has tracked household food consumption and spending. It is the longest-lasting program of its kind on Earth and is still around today. It has produced some rather interesting results. As much as people in the UK love their tea drinking has gone down from around 23 cups per person per week to only 8 cups. In 1974, nobody in the entire study ate a pizza. But now, the average Brit eats 75 grams of pizza every week. Less tea and more pizza makes it sound like they're becoming a little bit more like an American. You don't necessarily have to be alive in order to participate in long-running scientific experiments. Henrietta Lacks has been involved in thousands of medical research experiments, even though she died of cervical cancer in 1950. Traces of her can be found in just about every biomedical research clinic in the world. Before she died, cells from the tumor that killed her were taken without her knowledge or her permission. This was standard procedure for the time, even though it certainly wouldn't fly today. A doctor realized that unlike other samples, her cells had the rare ability to live even after they divided repeatedly. Her cells were able to reproduce and grow infinitely, which provided scientists with constant and reliable access to a human cell culture. Why bother finding someone else to take cells from when they can just farm Henrietta forever? It was first used to test a polio vaccine and has since been used to study cancer, the AIDS virus, the effects of radiation, gene mapping, and a variety of other medical pursuits. There are almost 11,000 patents that all involve her cells, which scientists have nicknamed HeLa cells. It's been estimated that over the last 50 years, scientists have grown about 20 tons of Henrietta Lacks cells. The cells can survive and reproduce so well that they're actually difficult to control and contain. They've become a common laboratory contaminant and sometimes get mixed in with other cell lines and disrupt research. You have to throw everything out when you discover that Henrietta accidentally got in. According to some estimates, 10 to 20% of cell lines have been contaminated with HeLa cells. If you are interested more in this story, please check out our video dedicated to Henrietta Lacks. Experiments that don't involve humans can last even longer. Humans eventually die, but things like the Oxford electric bell can outlast generations. It was set up in 1840 and has run almost continuously ever since. It is currently located in a corridor at Oxford and is still ringing. You can't hear it ringing anymore because it's behind a couple layers of glass, but it's still going. The exact composition of the batteries that power the bell is unknown. Scientists would love to find out, but they don't want to take it apart and break it. It is known, however, that the batteries are coated with molten sulfur for insulation. At one point in history, this kind of experiment had an important role to play in figuring out how exactly electricity worked. When the bell was created, scientists were still on the fence about the now obsolete theory of contact tension. The bell has far outlived this failed idea and is now just kept as a piece of history. The bell has produced roughly 10 billion rings. Perhaps even more impressive, although slightly younger, is the Beverly clock. It currently lives on the 3rd floor by the elevator in the physics department of the University of Otago in New Zealand. This clock is still running, despite the fact that it has not been manually wound since it was first built in 1864 by Arthur Beverly. This is possible because the clock's mechanism is driven by changes in atmospheric pressure and daily temperature variation. Both of these things cause the air in a 28-liter airtight box inside the clock to expand or contract. This pushes on a mechanical diaphragm that causes the clock's parts to move. A temperature variation of just 6 degrees over the course of a day creates enough pressure to raise a 1-pound weight by 1 inch, which is enough to drive the clock mechanism. The clock has stopped on a few occasions, such as when it needs to be cleaned or when there's some kind of mechanical failure. There have also been days when the temperature didn't fluctuate enough to give it enough energy and it stopped functioning. However, when the temperature does change, it gets right back to it, and it still hasn't been wound in 158 years. Perhaps the best known long experiment is the University of Queensland pitch drop experiment. This isn't because it's the most groundbreaking, but because it has a live stream. Anyone who wants to can watch, although, fair warning, it is very boring. It was started in 1927 by Professor Thomas Parnell, who wanted to show his students that some substances that look solid are in fact highly viscous fluids. He poured a heated sample of pitch into a sealed funnel and let it settle for 3 years. I'm sure his students were thrilled by this riveting display of science. In 1930, the seal at the neck of the funnel was cut, which allowed the pitch to start flowing. Slowly. Very, very slowly. The first drop didn't fall until 8 years later. It took another 8 years for the next one to fall. The most recent drop was in April of 2014. There's enough pitch for this experiment to last at least another 100 years. Unlike the Oxford electric bell and the Beverly clock, this experiment has never been interrupted. Because of this, it is considered to be the world's longest continuously running laboratory experiment, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.